I want to look at the relationship between environmental education and STEM education. STEM education, which may be an unfamiliar term, refers to science, technology, engineering and maths. Some parts of the world people talk about STEM with two M's: science, technology, engineering, maths and medicine. Some other parts of the world people talk about STEAM: science, technology, engineering, arts and maths. The issue, I think, what's important, is the relationship between environmental education and the rest of the curriculum. So we're faced with a whole range of wicked problems, and those problems can be food security, climate change, biodiversity loss. So each of those problems, in order to address them, you can't solve them, they're just too challenging, and if you try and respond to them in some way, they become different kinds of problems. So they're not sort of linear problems we can simply address. All those problems require people to become more resilient in terms of finding ways to respond to them. Now, in order to do that, you need to draw on knowledge from a range of different subject areas, and those subject areas, because often many of these challenges are environmental, will involve some environmental science, they'll involve some politics because the environment decisions are set in a political context, they may involve some mathematics, they may require engineering solutions. So the solutions that don't exist, but ways of conceptualizing the wicked problems and thinking about ways to respond to the challenges, require knowledge from a whole range of different sources. But in the school sector, things are organized in very sort of compartmentalized subject areas. And in schools, people often talk about the STEM subjects. Although really, if you look close at what goes on in schools, there's a lot of science education, sometimes broken down into physics, chemistry, earth science, biology. There may well be some maths. In many countries, there's not really much technology, there's not really much engineering. So really STEM, although it might be a policy driver, is really a lot of science and a lot of mathematics. So traditionally in schools, science education has tended to address the needs of 10% of the population who are going to go on and use science in their everyday lives beyond going to school, go to university, do science subjects. That's fine, but the other 90% of the population get a science education which doesn't really help them to become scientifically literate, to be able to cope with science in everyday life. So really, science in schools has focused on getting people through a pipeline where you start off with a large number of people and you gradually reduce that number to a small number of people who become your graduates and your postdocs and your lecturers and your professional science educators. Environmental education started off in the 1950s and 60s, focusing on a more holistic way of looking at the world, focusing on environmental science and the values behind environmental science. It never became a major curriculum area in most countries. How then can we try and bring these two together? A science education which focuses on developing scientific knowledge, which may be essential to addressing wicked problems, an environmental education which looks at science from a values perspective. How can we bring these two together? Because in order to address the wicked problems, we need to bring these bodies of knowledge, these ways of thinking together. That's a challenge facing educationists, but it's a challenge that is being addressed in a whole range of different ways, and it requires science education to sort of open up to becoming more value inclusive, to taking on board more ideas about how science is not value free, and environmental education to realise it's got something to contribute, but in some ways it brings together knowledge from a whole range of different areas and integrates them and presents a better balanced education for everybody.